Okay, we're here on Bounce Around Charleston. We thank you for joining us today and standing here with me, Attorney McFarland and Elder Johnson. Gentlemen, we have a whole lot going on in our community right now with the Walter Scott situation. And then as we look around the country, there's still yet a whole lot of other incidents going on with police brutality and citizens of the community. Where do we go from here? Attorney McFarland?
Well, you know, I think there has been described the situation that developed around Walter Scott's death. The consensus almost that there is a cultural change needed in our police forces across the country. And so where do we go from here begins with asking the question, what are the problems that need to be addressed? And I think that all departments, whether you had a police shooting or not, and particularly in North Charleston, as in Ferguson, as in New York, need to begin the process of looking at what system is in place that is causing the deaths of so many African American males, particularly. I think of the police cases that have been brought where officers were charged. My understanding is that 75% of the victims have been African American males.
Wow.
And so there is something going on with respect to policing and policing in African American communities in particular that needs to be addressed. So where do we start? I think there are a number of questions we have to ask in that regard, and departments need to begin addressing.
Okay, thank you, sir. Elder Johnson, you're in the trenches with a lot of these situations. What would you say about all of this?
Well, I would say what Mr. McFarland said, the culture. We have to change the culture of all the police department in this nation, because if we don't change the culture, it will continue to happen. For example, Chief Zumot came into North Charleston, and after Chief Zumot, Chief Driggers came. If Chief Driggers had changed the culture and not tolerate what Zumot tolerate, then we would have been sitting here today. What I mean by that is that I would not tolerate racial profiling. I would not tolerate police misconduct. I would not tolerate this. We're going to rebuild this department from the bottom. So the culture didn't change at all. So here we are sitting talking about a police shooting.
So do you think that this incident will cause the change to come about?
Oh, it have to. It really have to. This incident is going to change the nation. It's going to change the nation. A good example, Oklahoma. Oklahoma shot a young man a couple of days ago.
Yes, saw it in the news.
And they didn't hesitate to arrest the officer who did that. Didn't for Charleston, it probably wouldn't have never happened. So we can see the change, but now our leaders have to get involved to put that change on paper, to change the policy along with the police department, and that will change the culture.
Okay, that incident that you just talked about in Oklahoma, is that the incident with the guy who thought he had used
his taser?
His taser, but then he really used his gun? Okay, this taser situation, what is how do we address, when is it necessary to use it and when should you not use it?
Well, we have used a taser at will. You know, a lot of policemen, you know, you can say something to them to grab a taser. I had a family in my office this morning was tased 2 times by 2 different officers. And matter of fact, he's in course about that right now. But 3 years ago, North Charleston tased a young man. 2 officers tased a young man at the same time, knocked him off the porch, break his neck, and he died a month later from that taser. So that become a weapon of choice right now, because it's easy to use that taser. And what I had a discussion on yesterday with the police chief is that it has to be a red flag there. That red flag should be tracking how many times that particular officer has used that taser. And if we can track that, if he has excessive force of using that taser, then we know he's using that at will.
Okay.
Yeah, and certainly a taser ought not be used to punish a person. And that's
Exactly.
what seemingly in the few cases that have been written about lately, we see that that appears more to be the case. The taser isn't a weapon or an instrument to be used to bring a suspect under control. If you've got a suspect under control, if he is
Exactly.
down, if
Yes.
he's in handcuffs, there's no need to use the taser. And so the first question for North Charleston is, what is its policy with respect to the use of a taser? And secondly, whenever a taser is used, are you requiring officers to file a use of force report? I think the last time I was here, I mentioned during my years as municipal court judge when Reuben Greenberg became chief of the Charleston department. One of the first things he did in order to address the issue of use of force was to require officers to file a written report,
okay.
whenever force was used.
Exactly.
Not only does the officer have to file a report, but a supervisor needs to review that report. If there's anything that indicates that there was an abuse of an individual, then immediate disciplinary action has to take place. So when we talk about changing culture, we have to look at our policies first,
Exactly.
and then we have to look at the enforcement of the internal policies.
That's the key.
So
Okay,
you
let's do this. We're going to come back and talk some more, but I need to take a station break.
Okay.
Stay here with us. We'll be right back after this break. Okay, welcome back to Bounce Around Charleston. Standing here with me, Attorney McFarland and Elder Johnson. Great conversation, gentlemen. And we've been talking about the tasers and how it's used. And then we also, during the break, talked about many times the police officers may not report the facts.
Right. Police officer lies. Just as simple as that. You know, and that's why we can't have the police policing the police. We must have an outside entity to police the police department. For me, they talk about a citizen review board. I think the federal government needs to set up a federal review board when incidents like this happen, so the federal government can step in immediately to go ahead and address that issue.
Okay?
Yeah, I think citizen review boards certainly have a role to play because they are ongoing commissions that will act, you know, year in and year out. I'm sure in this instance, because of the circumstances, the Justice Department will undertake a major investigation, sort of on the same level it undertook in Ferguson. And just speaking of the Ferguson, the report from the Justice Department, which I've reviewed, it is clear that there are instances in that report that North Charleston could just pick up right today. And if they began to implement those findings and recommendations of the Justice Department, now they could begin to rebuild trust in the community. And as an example, we talked before we came on air about the fact that stopping citizens for taillight violations.
Okay.
One of the things Justice recommended for Ferguson is that they immediately discontinue those kinds of stops.
Exactly.
Yes.
Because the stops really aren't about safety. And ask any of the young black males, including my own son, whether when they were stopped after being checked for warrants or other issues, were they given a ticket for the taillight?
They say no.
And in many instances, the answer is no. The other side of that is that if there's not a ticket given, there is no tracking mechanism to say, today I stopped 10 African American males,
Okay.
whereas I might have, but there's no record of it because
Okay.
I'm not required to. I didn't file a warrant. I didn't do a warning ticket, nor did I do a traffic summons.
Okay. And we've talked about a whole lot of things, but I've got to bring this in. Resolutions. The body cameras that Representative Brenda Gilliard has introduced in the State House.
Exactly.
How will that help?
We have to have body cameras that officer cannot turn off. You know, cameras have proven itself. We've been sitting here today if someone didn't decide to use a camera to film that incident. But the camera cannot be turned off by an officer. And if they do get cameras that can be turned off, there should be some sort of reprimand from For
them
turning
turning
that
it
camera.
off. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think body cameras can be helpful because they do the same thing that cell phone videos have proven to be. But that's only, again, another component of the change that needs to be made, because you can have the body cameras, but then it's still subject to interpretation if the angles are not right, if the voices are not clear, or there's a reaction, or there's something off camera that happens that's not caught, then you're still in this situation. And that's why I go back to the whole issue of, you know, how do we change the process? How do we change policing? What are the things that are causing the negative responses in the by black males or officers towards black males, or both, that we need to look at and make important changes in regards to? And so body cameras are like citizen review boards. Those are two things, but there are a whole host of things we need to implement.
I think what we're going to have to bring you all back and talk further about these situations, because there has to be some resolutions to these situations. Thank you for being here with us on Bounce Around Charleston. We'll be right back after this break.